Thank you so much to Martha and Books by the Sea. This was so much their idea. This being my fourth book, basically the first three book release parties were very, very small. We would meet at Oliver's restaurant down in Dennis Line, have a few drinks. There would be no books for sale. I would just be standing there saying, look, I got a book out that's great. That initially was the plan for this, and then Martha came to me and said, we would like to make this a large event, and I said, absolutely. So, I want to give a little bit of the history of me, my family, my writing, etc. I'm a 12th generation Cape Codder. My connection is the Doan family that helped settle Eastham. So Deacon John Doan is my 9th great grandfather. It's a direct link, Doan Rock, Doan Homestead, that whole area, that's direct line. So the writing part came, my very first story that I ever wrote, I'm going to start with this, put it on the spot, was in 2nd grade. And I wrote
the 2nd grade teachers here.
A sequel to the movie The Goonies that came out down here. That would take me a little bit. And it was me and my friends, and we had adventures, things like that. And my love of writing started there. And it was just stories, and it evolved to poetry, short stories. I'm hoping in the future at some point to possibly do another one, but we'll see. I have a few other things in mind. In 2015, I started working on this book, and it was, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of hours of research. Unbelievable amounts of, meeting with people, phone interviews. I became very good friends with online newspaper archives. I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but it will blow your mind. The Elders Library in Chatham has their entire newspaper library for about 150 years online. So it was them, it was Barnstable Patriot from the Scribner's Library's website, Falmouth Library has theirs, and I just actually, within the last week, discovered the Nantucket newspaper online, so that's going to kill another few weeks of my life researching. And you see it all around the Cape. You see it right across the lights. In the past 3 or 4 years, there have been 3 different spots there. It's now Anthony's North End Deli. Before that, it was Pale Orc, and before that, it was Carluccio's. We're talking within the last 3 or 4 years. That's just one example of how places can come and go so quickly. So that's why I wanted in this book to highlight the ones that came and stayed and made an impact. And I guarantee you when I start showing pictures of some of these places, it's going to get those reactions. And that's what I want. There are 39 restaurants in the book. There were supposed to be 40, and I'll just tell a little quick story. The 40th restaurant that's not in there was supposed to be Joe Max. It did not get cut because I didn't want it in there. It got cut because I was getting in touch with the son of the second owner, Mirasola family, and it would be, I'll give you something next week, some information next week, and then it was next week, and next week, and next week. And it got to be about 16 months of next weeks, and I said, okay, well, I will just eliminate that. I can't wait. But the 40th chapter in the book, it's filled with recipes from some of these restaurants. I was lucky enough to have connections at Cape Cod Life, doing some writing for them, and they sent me a bunch of old recipes from their first 2 or 3 years of issues. So I went through and found restaurants that were in the book that had recipes in Cape Cod Life, and I used them. So you can go through those and see if there are anything you want to make. Again, there are a few that I want to make myself. There's Indian pudding in there that may be the wrong recipe, but we'll find out. So let's take a stroll down memory lane. This will be mostly pictures. I took some notes down so that I don't completely screw up dates and things like that. So the very first spot when people think of legendary Cape Cod restaurants, you've got Thompson's Planet, and it was top of my list. Everything kind of fell in line after that. Very excited about that. So we start from there, but Thompson's is far from the only legendary restaurant because it depends on where you grew up on the Cape, what you consider legendary. I grew up in Yarmouth, so when I was researching, Yarmouth, Dennis, and Hyannis had a huge amount of restaurants that I had to whittle them down because they couldn't go 2 miles. So, but. Second on my list was Mildred's Chowhouse. That was one that I remembered very well growing up. And so, for those of you that aren't as familiar with it, that Mildred's opened in 1949. Their chowder is beyond legendary. It actually was ordered by the summer White House. I see a hand, yes.
We have Mildred's family here.
Are you really?
She's got a picture.
She won't stand up. She's too shy.
Stand up.
Oh, come on. Come on.
I love it. That's awesome. I won't make you speak, but I will point you out. And Rose, I spoke to Sylvia Leonard, who was Rose's daughter, and she gave me a lot of the great inside info about the restaurant being, a former family home. And they started serving their neighbors and boarders until eventually it became the restaurant. And Rose Scocchetti, mother, bought all the property on Black Flats Road in Dennis. And at one point they had cottages, I believe they had a golf course there. No better than me. I don't have my book here to fact check myself. I said I had to make my notes just to make sure that I don't screw up dates. So some of the places are still standing. And the columns, unfortunately, it's such a beautiful spot. And it started off as actually a family home. Obed Baker, who was a sea captain, it was around Civil War time, and it started as a regular family home, and it was passed down through the family until it was sold and became a restaurant in 1961. And then 10 years later, 71, it became more of a jazz club. And I'm sure that some of you here went there, and I would have loved to have been inside it when it was actually in business. But unfortunately, it closed in '86, and it's been a few times it's been sold, and some attempts have been made to renovate it. I actually was able to sit down with Tom Davis, the real estate agent who was trying to sell it. And I don't know if he's here. I told him to come, but he said he'd try. He told me that it was actually sold and people did work on it inside, basically hollowing it out. And then they ran out of money. So, well, okay. The dome is actually located in Falmouth Woods Hole within eyesight of the Steamship Authority. If you're driving towards the ferry, it's on the right side of Woods Hole Road. It's covered with a big blue tarp. And they used to have to put a tarp on it because the geodesic dome would conduct heat. So you'd be sitting in a restaurant and be just steaming. So the neat thing about the dome is that it was built by our Buckminster Fuller, who created the geodesic dome that is Epcot Center. Walt Disney. So this picture of it particularly, I like it. The Falmouth Historical Society was nice enough to send the pictures to me. But the pictures of the outside are actually better, where you can see the uniqueness of it. But it's been closed for 15 years. They're trying to get it designated as a historical property so that they can, revamp it and have people do tours of it, which is something that I want to do. Because all I could do when I took pictures for the book was go up to the outside and hope I didn't get yelled at. I didn't. So, I was hoping that John Zatarian would be here from the paddock, but today is his 80th birthday, and he said he had dinner. And I said to him, I said, sure you don't want to come celebrate your birthday here by sitting and listening to me talk about you? He said, no. He and his wife Maxine were really nice, and once they found out who my grandparents were, which for any of you who don't know, my grandfather, who was going to be embarrassed in a little while, was sitting over there. John Sullivan, who used to own Sullivan's Donut Shop in Hyannis. So once I told John and Maxine who my grandparents were, Rose and Sully, he said, well, we can't talk on the phone. You've got to come to the house. So I went to his house and sat in his dining room and hung out with him. He actually wants me to come and hang out with him again. It's pretty neat. And then Starbucks, not the coffee place. Yes, I was going to throw that in. Starbucks and Bloom's Prime Rib House were owned by the Bloom family, and I was able to speak to Artie Bloom, who now lives up on the North Shore. And I invited him to come too, because I know you get 2 hours to go. Starbucks is more of a recent place. The attic closed in 2012. Starbucks became Star City Grill, closed in 2006. And became Circuit City, which never opened, and it became Harbor Freight Tools. And this is where my research came in, was to go deeper than the most obvious choices and find places that these are both from pre-World War II. So, I'll start on the right. Southward Inn is in Orleans, was in Orleans. It's now Bank of America down near Town Cove. But it was actually owned by a man named George Southward. When I was researching, I thought that was fascinating. It opened in 1916. It was opened in the early 60s. The recipes they used here were so popular, they actually were used in Cape Cod Cookbook, written by Peter Hunt in 1954. That's kind of his lasting legacy. On the left, the beacon was one that fascinated me more than almost all others, because when I was speaking to Tom Davis, a real estate agent, he said, yeah, I moved to the Cape in, I believe, 66, and he said he bought the beacon. And I said, I have no idea what that is. But the beacon became the brass rail, became M.D. Armstrong's, and in my day, it became a Hyannisport Brewing Company. So this was located near the west end of Main Street, before the West End Rotary was even there. And the fascinating thing about the beacon was the fact that in its day, when it opened in the late 1930s, it was doing numbers that would rival what Thompson's Clam Bar was doing 30 years later, serving 2,000 people a day at times. It was so big that they had to actually build an outdoor snack bar, which was pretty much unheard of then. They called it the Snackery at the Beacon. And so it was a very popular place that I had never heard of, and that's part of what I really enjoyed about making this book, was finding places that, some places I haven't heard of that others have. I was hoping that there would be some that people reading it would say, I didn't even know that existed. And each and every chapter in the book is as full of a history as I could make for each spot. Because there's no place in there that I don't feel belongs, because it was my book. They gave me carte blanche, do what you want. As long as you've got enough restaurants and enough words, you choose what you think fits. So I went with what I thought were the most deserving spots in there. Some of the places got in there because of their stories of what they went through. Elsie's in Falmouth. Elsie and Henry Bowman were Jewish living in Germany, and they fled Nazi Germany during Hitler's rise to power. And they actually came to Boston, and they opened a place called Elsie's Lunch up in Harvard Square. And then in the late 60s, they came down to Falmouth and opened a similar spot, lunch, sandwiches, and it's now a place called Crab Apples on Main Street. My Tin Man Diner has an incredible story. The ending of it is sad, where Barbara Lynn and her daughter Susan, they had bought it in the late 1980s, and it was a very popular spot, but a jealous boyfriend of one of the wait staff there burned it down in 2000. And it was to the point that people, regular customers, would go and sit in the parking lot with their coffees with the burned ashes of the diner. But eventually it was rebuilt in 2008, and it was a big celebration. It stayed open for a few more years, but eventually closed up again. Others, the names are what made them fascinating. Tit for Topson is one of the recent ones that we closed in 2013, I believe, in Provincetown. And I thought it was fascinating because it means the tip of the cape for the Topson quality is what shortened it to that. And I just thought that was fascinating. And it's a great Portuguese restaurant, so that's right up my alley. The name Reno, there's one of two stories of how the name came about. It's either that it's supposed to be the Orleans Diner, and when they were shipping the letters, the other letters that spelled Orleans got smashed, so they used what was left. The other possible idea is that there was a sign for a company called Norwich Refrigeration. So if you take the G out, you've got Reno left. We've got some places that were well known before they became restaurants. And they're still around now. High Brewster is a private residence now, but it was built in 1738 as the home of Nathaniel Winslow and Brewster, and it was passed down through the family before becoming a restaurant and also an inn upstairs. And actually, I believe the family is the Thorne family that bought it in 2001, and they had some renovations done on it. And when they were doing the renovations, they actually found behind the fireplace in the main living room, they found crawl space that was used as a stop on the Underground Railroad. There's a Rider House. I spoke to a few people that used to work there, and that's in Chatham, and it's now condominiums. But that picture I took last summer. So the actual building there is the Christopher Rider House, and there's a circle of condos that are there. And that house was built in 1818. There's some that were icons for different reasons. East Bay Lodge was obviously in Osterville. It was open for more than 100 years. It's now also condos, but the building doesn't stand anymore. A lot of very well-known Cape Cod jazz musicians used to frequent Johnny E's. A few of them were friends of the family, like Lou Colombo and Dave McKenna, that I joked with my grandfather that growing up, I didn't know they were anybody. Just Mr. Colombo and Mr. McKenna, they were just there. And only when I got older did I appreciate, the fact of who I knew through association, knew through my grandfather, not through anything I did. Some of the spots are known more, as much for their owners, as much as, the actual restaurant themselves. Sword and Shield, I had the chance to meet Stacy Apostle, whose dad Ted owned it forever. And their family home was located just to the left of the restaurant, Schoolhouse Road in Harwich. And I got to go and sit in the living room and chat with her. And she became actually a friend on Facebook. She actually sent a friend in to get some books. And then Dorsey's on the right, I knew very well growing up from my uncles and aunts and my father. And I know I saw him come in. You want to put your hand up, Mr. Dorsey? And there were some, every spot that I put in there has some reason that it's in. Some claim to fame, because there's any restaurant that makes it that long and leaves that kind of an impact has to have something going. Now, the Cranberry Moose, it's in Yarmouth Court on 6A, it's now, I think it's food there. But that restaurant covered that, Ed Wolfley, who was the head chef there in the 1980s, he actually sent me that menu. It was drawn by Edward Bory, the illustrator. And on the right, the Mayflower restaurant is now Cocaigne's Burger Bar. It was Tommy Doyle's for a long time. I actually was able to go to meet Nick Joker, go to his house. He showed me around his basement trophy room with pictures of him with the Kennedys. They used to cater events at the Kennedy compound. So the legacies of these spots will live forever. Just when I can hear people see the names, I was able to speak with Brian Dunn, who used to own Aesop's Tables, and Anna Woodland, who she and her husband Bruce used to own Northport in Chatham. And Anna Woodland was actually a funny story because I found her through her nephew, who used to be the chef at High Brewster. And I was trying to reach him, and he actually said, "Do you have the Northport in there?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, my uncle and aunt are Bruce and Anna." So he put me in touch with them. And I told her what I was writing, and she said, "Can I see what you're writing?" So I emailed her the chapter on the Northport. And let's just say, when you read the Northport chapter in the book, it should say written by Anna Woodland. Because she sent it back with tons of corrections. Well, this isn't that, this isn't that. It's like, okay. Because I thought it was pretty accurate, the research I did, but I said, you lived it, so I'm going to go with your words as far as that goes. But yes, I believe that all of the spots in here deserve to be in there. Danny Kaye's, the irony is that the Bartolome family owned and ran Danny Kaye's in Falmouth, which is now Golden Saints. But the connections to the Cape, where I always joke about how small the Cape is. So the Bartolome family owned Danny Kaye's. Their son Jay went and he bought the Regatta of Catuit, which is in the book. He opened it as the Bellagio, which is open now. He then also opened Anthony's North End Deli, which is Stone's Throw here. He was going to come, but he's got 2 restaurants for us. I understand. I did that a long time. Then Mary Jean's is Brazilian grill. And Mary Ann Taylor is the daughter of Mary and Jean Renier, and she was nice enough to loan me that. On the right is a painting of the restaurant. So that is the end of the PowerPoint presentation. So what's going to happen now is if you have any questions, I can answer them for, I don't know what the time it is, but then we're going to have a little intermission, and then we're going to have some people, former owners, come and speak. And just so that anyone thinks of slipping out during the intermission, we're going to have Don McKay is going to speak about the Ace of Burst House. Are you listening? Oh, no, don't worry. I'm going in order of where you're sitting. And then I'm really excited to have the legend Earl Mills from the Flume. You only have to speak for a couple minutes, I promise. And then to the right, reserved, my grandfather, John Sullivan of Sullivan Sullivan. Again, you only have to speak for a minute or two, Grandpa, I promise. Most of the talking will be me. And then we're going to have Kim Eaton, who's stepfather of old Thompson's Clan Bar. He came up to me and I said, yes, I see you.
You're fact checking. Did you put all yourself, or did you have two people that helped you?
For the places where I actually was able to speak with former owners, or at least people that worked there, I was able to kind of fact check against it. Some of the places, for example, there's a place in Falmouth called the Bellows. It opened in the early 30s, it closed before 1950. Nobody who is associated with that restaurant is still around. So I had to do the newspaper archives. It's actually, the Bellows is now a spot called Red Horse Inn. It was Red Horse Grill. So yes, most of it was done by me, but the people I was lucky enough to talk with, I put that on them, you lived it, so I'm going to go with whatever you say. Yes, Pam, I saw you raise your hand.
Because I wanted you to talk about your second grade teacher who also raised her hand.
I was going to Nico, my love of writing started there, and through everything I got through to get me to here, I was in second grade 30 years ago, and within the last few months, I was actually able to, with some help from my mom, connect with my second grade teacher, Clara Rodriguez, who's the first time I've seen her in 25 years, and I spotted her across the room, and I thanked her in private for giving me this love of writing and helping me on this journey, but I will thank her in front of everyone now and say thank you so much, I'm so glad you're here.
Yay!
I'm so proud of you, Chris.
Oh.
And she said I was the same as I did in second grade. So
And my comment is going to be, I don't know if it's the original, but the Joe Max waterboard is at Longfellow's Pub in West Yarmouth.
it is.
Yeah.
Well, my Uncle Bob worked at Joe Max near the end, and so that was how I kind of found out where that was. And there was I wanted to put that in the book so bad, but
What do you conclude from the fact that the Beacon and Thompson's Clan Bar and all these other wonderful restaurants were so popular? How did they come to be so popular? And would they be today as people's tastes change?
I think Thompson's would definitely, I think that just, eventually it gets to be, and the story, and Kim will be able to vouch for more than me. I did because I didn't have anyone to interview for that, I did a lot of reading and research about stories about it, and how the seafood was so fresh, so people would catch it and bring it in and say, can you make it for us? You're right here. And eventually, we've got something where word of mouth spreads, positive reviews. And I think that's what helped Thompson's. Now, no offense to the Beacon, but I think it was big and had a lot of good food, and there was not much else around. And I'm not saying that it didn't deserve to be as big as it was for 30 years. I just think that it was right place, right time, and not much competition.
It was familiar rather than a fine dining.
Yeah, it wasn't like Captain Frosty's, but it was sort of. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, it wasn't, but it did. It had a lot of burgers and hot dogs and ice cream. And it was that sort of summery place. And I had a lot of fun researching all of these spots because every single place that ended up making the cut had, neat stories. It had, there's the story that, for my family connection, that Don told me about my grandfather and his father. Was it the flying bridge, the gas pipe story? There's just stories that I would hear. Some that I couldn't put in the book, but some that just it made it so worthwhile that when I say I did hundreds and hundreds of hours of research, it was all worth it. Yes.
What elementary school did you go
Well, it was called South Yarmouth Elementary, and my principal was Lawrence MacArthur, so he ended up being And when I think back to all my principals at all my schools, he's the only one that I really remember. I couldn't remember my principal senior year of DY. That's a while later. But now it's campus of Bridgewater State. Or is it? I haven't seen it. So I wanted to make sure that while I was standing here, I wanted to thank a lot of people that helped with this book. And a lot of them I've actually been name dropping as I go along, but I feel it's proper to, because without the help of former owners and former employees, I talked to historical societies and chambers of commerce, and I talked to former newspaper reporters. And without them, my knowledge, if you were to take out everything in the book that I had to research, it would be 3 or 4 sentences for each restaurant. This place was in that town and it was open around these times. So I couldn't do it without, Don McKay, you helped me out. Grandpa, I bothered you so much about all these places. John Terry, who's not here, Nick Jokum, Johnny Yee, who I've gotten in a lot of trouble already. George Harry, Dorsey, Marty Bloom, Sylvia Leonard from Roses, Marianne Taylor from Mary Jeans, Hannah Woodland, who wrote the Northport chapter for me. Appreciate that. Rose and Bob, Gian Ferrante, who owned the Yankee Clipper in Sandwich. It's now an antique shop. Stacy Apostle, of course, who I mentioned, Jay Bartolome, Brian Dunn, Barbara Lynn from My Tin Man Diner, William Kaiser, whose family owned the Clipper in Orleans is now Limestone Furniture, Jane Klimchuk, whose family owned Reno Diner, and Laura Parker Fish, who owns the best breakfast place in Cape Cod, Laura and Company.
Woo! Sorry.
I didn't tell her I was going to
Go there every year, my birthday.
Of course.
I like the ocean house.
Are there any other questions? Because at some point I have to cut myself off because I'll think of something else to talk about. And then this will be intermission. So what we're going to tell you is we have some refreshment hidden behind the screen. It'll be about 15 minutes if people want to mingle, chat, and then we can reconvene and have some
We had a fraternity of restaurateurs. Everybody knew everybody else. And you always referred to people that came to my restaurant anyway. I'd say, oh, go over, do you want a great donut? There's only one place to go. Go to see someone. The place at the end of at the west end of Hyannis. And that place that is now a Brazilian meat company. Go down and go to the theater down at the, I lose the names of these places, but it used to be a theater.
Yeah.
And they had a restaurant there. And they mentioned that. And someone mentioned, would the restaurant be successful today? You'd have them standing in line. Really? If I wanted a decent fried clam, instead of having fried breading, or if I wanted a piece of fish that was cooked properly, with the crumbs on it, and butter, and lemon, I would have to go to a restaurant 30 years ago. I made at a small restaurant, I made my own veal stock, my vegetable stock, my chicken stock, my beef stock, and I had a freezer just for stocks. And my stock tasted good before I even added it to the ingredients. And it's true. I knew the lady that ran the restaurant, we knew each other. And three of the people who were my mentors, I never went to school to learn to cook. My grandmother started me, and my mom and dad kept pushing and made us all cook. Edna Harris at Coonamessett Inn was one of my mistresses. And her daughter, Hilda Coppage at Papaneset Inn, was one of my other mistresses. And the man at Wimpy's, Ray Harstetter, was another one. And Ray Harstetter was a slave driver, the German slave driver. So boy, did I learn the business. Did I learn the business. And the business became addictive. It was hard work, but I loved going there. I spent sometimes 17, 18 hours a day there. And watched every plate that left that kitchen. Somebody said, how did you do that and still be busy? Because I had to. That's how I did it. I had to. And then I watched them when they came back. And the greatest thing was, most of them would be empty. Which just kind of just made you become more addicted to the business. It certainly is, and the other thing about, someone that, as I said, asking if those restaurants would make it. Well, we finally get a decent cup of chowder. I opened up 2 bushels of courhouse every week. I bought a whole swordfish every week. And in the season, I had venison hanging in my walk-in. I used to bring the kids in when people came with their kids. That's why I hooked the adults in. Because when the kids were going to go up to dinner, they'd say, Mom, can we go to the flume? Because they wanted to see me hand them live lobsters. Or go down and show them the whole venison, the whole deer. Or show them the side of swordfish. And take them in that room and show them all the different things that would eventually be on the plate. And we made all of our own desserts. And people would say, can I have my dessert now? So I can have it at the end of the dinner. And they did that because we only made so many cream pies that day. So when they sold out, they sold out. But we made everything on the premises. And we had everything from soft shell crab to fin and hattie to swordfish with anchovy butter to soft shell crab to you name it. Roast beef hash to, I don't know, red flannel hat, boiled dinner, New England crockery, which you don't see anywhere. You didn't see it then, and you don't see it today. Chicken pot pies, scrawled with lobster sauce on the side. And someone said, oh, the young lady there, where she said, well, couldn't we sing a song to my buddy over here, Sully? Well, I'll close with that, because I love to sing. Here goes.
Could you imagine?
Those were the days, my friends, I thought we'd never end. I'd sing and dance forever in the day. That's enough. Thank you very much.
And before I get too started, I just want to say that it was my pleasure and honor to be able to add a little bit to your legacy with this book, but it needed no help at all. And so I'd like you to say a few words, and I'm going to bring the mic to you because you won't have to.
I don't remember much about the donut business because most of the time I had a couple robberies, so I didn't have to worry about the taste. But I can remember. The only thing I can remember about the donut business is the Barnstable police used to come in there and they would say to me, you know, we like to stake out your place because we know that eventually whoever we're looking for will end up coming. So lots of times, a lot of the guys who were faithful about their taste, they ended up in the bucket.
An easy thing to pull off. So thank you so much to the Cultural Center, Bob Nash. I was a chicken with my head cut off earlier, trying to get my presentation set up. Thank you so much to Martha and Books by the Sea. My books are available there too, and lots of other great books over in Centerville, Belltown Mall. Thank you so much to Laura Hopper-Fish of Laura and Tony. She made the Death by Chocolate dessert that was formerly at Aesop's Fables. She's still here, and she leave. Well, anyway, Aesop's Fables, Brian Gunn, he didn't want to come and speak, but he authorized her to make his famous dessert that he actually trademarked. That's what I found out. But thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to Earl and Dawn and Grandpa and Kim and Dorsey and anyone else that I may have missed in my family that came, Deanna and Mike that are right in the front. Thank you all so much, and I really